Okay, we are here for probably one of the most requested podcasts that I've had for the show. So, the 3-step guide for a more easeful and progressive birth experience. Before we jump into the 3 steps, I just want to explain exactly what that means by a more easeful and progressive birth. So, here at Natural Birth Co, when I think about an easeful birth, I want you to imagine you could have 2 women who have the exact same birth in the sense of contractions, how long it lasted, how their baby moved down, how they pushed, etc. And one woman feels calm, safe, she feels heard, she feels supported, she feels trusting in the process of birth, trusting in her body, and so much strength in her resilience to manage contractions. So this is woman A. That is what we refer to as an easeful birth. It is to do with the energy, the vibe, the feeling behind her birth experience. So she feels satisfied with that experience. Another woman who has had, logically on paper, the exact same birth, she might feel a bit of frantic energy. She might feel unsafe. She might feel scared during her birth, unsupported, unheard. She doesn't feel trust in her body or the process of birth, and she doesn't necessarily feel confident in her ability to handle contractions. That would be a less easeful birth experience. Even though we had the exact same outcome, that would be considered a less easeful birth experience. So what we're aiming for today as part of this podcast is the more easeful side of birth. Now, when it comes to a progressive birth experience, and this gets all us type A tingling out there who just love the word progress. So a progressive birth experience is essentially, you imagine we've got our bony pelvis, we've got our uterus above with the baby head down. We want our labor to be the uterus contracting, pressing baby down through the pelvis, allowing baby with each contraction to move down, down, down at a progressive rate to then come out vaginally and be birthed. Rather than, you're kind of thinking like, well, duh, Ames, that's the whole point of birth. But rather than within the pelvis there being potential obstructions in the way from ligaments, potential obstructions from the actual bony pelvis, that we're getting these epic contractions and babe's head is just hitting a firm surface and not moving down with the contractions. That would be on the less progressive side. In addition, another less progressive birth can look like these contractions that aren't flowing. So we might have, rather than these beautiful big long surges that are strong, that are consistent, instead we might have these kind of flaky little contractions that some are strong, some are weak, some are long, some are short. They're a little bit more random and frantic. So that would be on the less progressive side. So what we're talking about today is 3 steps to an easeful, talking about energy, and progressive, talking about solid contractions, baby moving down type of birth experience. So the 3 steps that I broke it down to today is 1, partner support, 2, labor and birth positions, and 3, managing pain during labor. 3 topics I just love talking about. So let's start with number 1, partner support. So your partner support can help you drastically have not only an easeful birth, but also a progressive birth. Your partner support is massive and just as essential as you knowing what you need to do for birth. It is just as essential them knowing what they need to do for birth. This can be your husband, your mum, your sister, doesn't matter. So when it comes to partner support, what comes to mind first is one of my beautiful girlfriends, Lucy, who, funnily enough, was just on the previous episode with her birth story. She talks about her 2 birth experiences that were normal, natural, amazing. So her beautiful partner, Jacob, he is amazing birth support, and I'm going to exactly explain why and how he helped his wife, Lucy, have an easeful and progressive birth. So firstly, he kept her and allowed her to stay in her reptilian mind during labor. What that means is that we have our frontal lobe, our logical mind, our decisive mind here at the front, and then in our back we have our reptilian mind, which is our intuitive state of mind. There's no concept of time. Our body is in flow. We are very present in this moment. So when we are birthing, our natural birthing hormones, the hormonal symphony, as Sarah Buckley calls it, is producing beta endorphins, which is the same beta endorphins we release with exercise. These beta endorphins cloud our frontal lobe and descend us into our reptilian mind. The more intense labor gets, the more beta endorphins we get, the more the laboring woman is able to descend to her reptilian mind when she is just left to her devices. Now, when we do things like ask frontal lobe type of questions, we make frontal lobe type of commands, we turn on lights, we stimulate, we make mama feel unsafe, disturbed, or observed, we bring mama back into that frontal lobe where all of a sudden she's feeling pain, she's not moving with her body, and her contractions slow down and all sorts of things happen. Whereas when she's in her reptilian mind, where she's meant to be, she moves intuitively. She's able to manage the pain in labor, knowing it's the most intuitive thing her body will ever do, which is birth. She is able to be a lot more present. She's not counting down the hours, the days, or whatever that she's in labor. She's present, and time is a constant 1 hour, 1 day. She has no idea. That is where we want to be. So how Jacob supported that with Lucy during her labor of their second babe, and we go into this deeply in the birth workshop that Lucy and Jacob went to, is that he specifically in this scene that she was seen like a movie. I'm just imagining it here. But Lucy was in the shower and they're at home. Jacob comes in, pops her water right next to her on the bench, but doesn't say anything. That's a perfect example of not coming in, asking her, Luce, do you need some water? Her having to process what he said, conjure up a response in her mind, and then somehow take that response from her mind out of her mouth. It sounds crazy, but for a laboring and birthing woman, that is wildly difficult. And that is very frontal lobe thinking. So Jacob did the right thing, not bringing her into her logical mind, just popping the water next to her. If she wants it, she'll take a sip. If she doesn't, she'll leave it. The other thing that he did is that he kept checking in with her. So she was doing an amazing job laboring in the shower. She didn't need him. She was just doing her thing. She's in her intuitive mind, moving intuitively. Now, rather than Jacob feeling useless and being like, I want to help going in, Luce, do this, Luce, do that. Do you want me to do this? Do you want me to squeeze your hips? Do you want me to tickle you? Do you want me to do this? He just left her to her devices, but he kept popping in, checking in to say, you all good? If you need me, I'm here. If you need me, I'm here, yell out. So not only is that not bringing her out of her reptilian mind, but that is encouraging her into her reptilian mind because he's giving her the sense of safety, the sense of support. He is there loving and connected to her, which is producing all these epic hormones, which is helping her get deeper into her reptilian mind. So that was just such a beautiful example of how he supported her through that process of birth to stay in her reptilian mind, to allow birth to be easeful and progressive. The second epic thing that Jacob did was that he helped her come back to baseline. And honestly, I don't think he had to do this too much with Luce because it was her second babe and she was kind of like knowing what was up. But what we talk about in our birth workshop is that we experience pain, we experience contractions, and we manage as women till we get to the point where we don't manage anymore and we get frantic. We get overwhelmed. We get scared. We get doubtful. We get fearful. That is a normal emotional response during labor. That is the point where you will probably ask for the epidural, which is normal. Even if you are dead set, I do not want the epidural, you will probably ask for it at that time, and that is fine. That is normal. So when you get to that peak, that is where, when your partner knows exactly what to do to bring you back to what we call baseline. He knows how to calm you down. He knows what affirmations to say. He knows how to provide you with the reassurance that you need to know that you are safe, that you can do this, that you're doing an amazing job, that this is hard, but you can do hard things. all of the right things to say. He can tune you back into your breath to then bring you back to baseline, to then continue to be into your reptilian mind and continue to manage in the present moment, moving intuitively, being in tune with your body and the intuitive process of birth. So that's another fantastic skill that your partner can support you in, because you will reach these peaks during labor. Almost definitely you will reach these peaks. And it's important that you're ready and he's ready, that it's not like something's wrong. It's not something we need to fix. It is something you need support in, you need confidence, you need reassurance in to bring you back to baseline. The third epic thing that Jacob did during Lucy's birth experience to support her to have a more easeful and progressive birth is stimulate oxytocin. So there's so many techniques we go through in our birth workshop to stimulate oxytocin, and I'm going to give you a couple today, where oxytocin is our love and connection hormone. When mom is feeling loved and connected, she is surging with oxytocin. This needs to be supported by an environment that is safe, undisturbed, and unobserved. So to get these beautiful surges of oxytocin, the oxytocin is what directly translates to great effective contractions. Oxytocin contracts your uterus. So when we have good, solid, consistent oxytocin, we have good, solid contractions that are going to make a progressive birth experience. Like we talked about earlier, good contractions pushes your baby down. So we need good oxytocin flow. Now, the best way to get oxytocin flow is with the birth partner. The birth partner will control the birth environment that you're in, making you feel safe, undisturbed, and unobserved. They will get rid of anything that makes you feel unsafe, disturbed, or observed. That is a great support from the birth partner. The other thing is to allow you to feel loved and connected. There's so many things that they can do, such as pressure points on the ankles, such as pressure points on the back to help stimulate oxytocin. They can do all these different massage techniques. They can do this breath work with you. They can do a light touch massage. There are so many epic things a birth partner can do to stimulate oxytocin, making you feel loved and connected. Affirmations is another great example. Yes, so that is a wonderful way that the partner can support your easeful and progressive birth. Now, when it comes to our second step to a more easeful and progressive birth, we have labor and birth positions. So I want you to imagine that your baby is moving down through the pelvis. You've got your pelvis, you've got your hips, you've got the front of the pelvis, you've got the sacrum at the back, and there's this big open cavity within the pelvis. That is the cavity your baby needs to move down and through. Their whole head, their whole body needs to move down and through. Now, when our legs are together, we are laying on our back, we are rounding our spine. That cavity inside of the pelvis is going to be much smaller than if we are leaning forward, if our legs are moving constantly, if our body is moving constantly. Our sacrum has the ability to lift out of the pelvis, which it absolutely does when the joints are mobile, they're lubricated, they're flexible because they've been used in pregnancy, but they're also not got the weight of the whole body because we're laying on our back. So positions during labor are amazing. So active birth is always amazing in all forms. Simply moving the body during labor if you've got to remember one thing, moving the body during labor is amazing. Now, I'm going to use Lucy and Jacob again as an example. If we want to get specific with exact positions to create space in the pelvis, not only to create space in the pelvis, but to create spaces at different planes of the pelvis as baby moves down through the pelvis. So we have the inlet at the top of the pelvis, we have the mid-pelvis in the center, and then we have the outlet at the bottom of the pelvis. So babe obviously enters the inlet, moves through to the mid-pelvis, then moves through to the outlet, and then is birthed. So there are different positions we can do when baby is at different planes of the pelvis to create space, to allow each and every contraction to be more progressive in descending your baby down. Now, what is amazing here, so let's use Lucy and Jacob as an example. With their first birth, where they hadn't done our birth workshop, They had some birth positions, which included a lot of external rotation of the thighs. So imagine sitting on a birth ball with the legs wide. Imagine leaning over the couch with the legs wide. All of these things with legs wide, which felt amazing at home during the start of birth. However, when Lucy went to get into the car to drive to the hospital, all of a sudden those birth positions that she had imagined doing throughout the whole birth were uncomfortable, were painful, were not what her body was after. Now, in hindsight, what we can reflect is that those external rotation of the thigh positions are actually positions specific for the inlet of the pelvis at the start of labor. We open the top of the pelvis really well in those positions, but we close the rest. So if babe's head is already quite low in the mid-pelvis, in the outlet, and we're in this external rotation, that can be really uncomfortable, not only on the mama's pelvis, but I'm sure on the baby's head as well. Not that it's anything dramatic, it's not going to do anything bad to the baby as such, but it isn't progressive and it's not going to lead towards a progressive birth experience through creating space where baby's head is. So what Lucy and Jacob then went through the workshop and they found out about the positions for the inlet, the positions for the mid-pelvis, and the positions for the outlet. They then went back afterwards, practiced one night a week or so. She explains this in the podcast. Different positions that they liked. Lucy was saying the ones that felt comfortable, the ones that were uncomfortable. Jacob would note that down, so then he would know how to guide her during birth. So when it came to birth, Lucy was doing her own thing. She was in her reptilian mind. She was quite happy. Jacob was not interrupting her. He was there when she needed, but he was doing his own thing. He came in to check in, let her know that he was there if she needed, and she all of a sudden had a leg up on the bed. So she was in a lunge type of position. Now, this is known as an asymmetrical position. One leg doing one thing, one leg doing another thing. This is a position ideal for the mid-pelvis. So that would indicate to Jacob, which it did because he's a logical and knowledgeable man, that the baby's head has moved through the inlet and has now got to the mid-pelvis. So he knew in that moment, it looks like she's intuitively moved into this position. So baby must be in the mid-pelvis. The way that we can confirm that is through Mama, Lucy, feeling pressure in her back passage during contractions. So we asked her in that moment, are you feeling pressure in your back passage? And she said, I'm not too sure yet, because obviously she's not paying attention. She's not logically thinking about where she's feeling pressure, where she's not. She's just moving intuitively exactly as she should be. So the next couple of contractions, she paid attention. And she's like, actually, yeah, I do have some pressure in my back passage during the contractions. So that was a perfect example of them not only moving intuitively, but also Jacob having the knowledge and the support to understand birth positions and how to create space during labor for a progressive birth experience. So say if Lucy hadn't necessarily moved into that position intuitively and he asked her those questions, he could have explained to her what position to go to make space to allow baby to move through a lot quicker and easier with good, solid contractions. So then when they went to hospital this time, he asked her, where are you feeling pressure? And asked her both during and in between. She could only feel pressure during, not in between contractions, meaning that babe was still in the mid-pelvis, meaning that she stayed in a lunge on their transition from home to hospital. So that is a perfect example of supporting the pelvis and space in the pelvis to help have a progressive birth. That is also more easeful because it obviously feels much better when baby has plenty of space for both babes and mum than if we're cutting off baby's space and baby's trying to push down through this pelvis. So when we know how to create space in the pelvis at different planes, and on top of that, we know how to know where baby is in the pelvis, which I know it sounds complex, it sounds technical, it's really not. Every single couple walks out of our birth workshop knowing exactly how to know where baby is, how to create space in the pelvis. We can help mamas to have a much more progressive and easeful birth experience. This brings us to our third and final step on how to have an easeful and progressive birth, is managing pain during labor. Oh, what a massive and delicious topic. I love talking about it. So honestly, the pain queen that comes to mind is one of our mamas, Cody. She is an absolute legend. She's had 2 babes. She actually has a birth story on our podcast, number 43 I've got here, if you wanted to go back and listen. So she had her first babe, had an amazing induction experience, and had a vaginal birth. Her second babe was not an induction, had a vaginal birth, and she talks about the comparison of the two on that birth story podcast. Now, she has owned pain like nothing else I've seen before. So the way that she explains is that as she experienced the contractions during labor, there was no sense of unsafety. She knew she was safe and that this sensation was normal and meant to be there. She knew this sensation was birthing her baby. It wasn't comfortable, but she knew it was hard and she could do hard things. She could manage it. So the way that she managed her labor was that as she went through the process of birth, it was almost like, and this worked for her, I'm not saying it'd work for everyone, but it worked for her. It was almost like this countdown through each and every individual contraction. So she would start her contraction and she would go find her birth comb. She'd then find her birth comb, pick it up, she'd squeeze it, and she would do that for, I don't know, a few breaths. And then she would start her vocal toning, which is the low ooh type of sounds. And she would do that for all the vowel sounds. So A, E, I, O, U. So that's 5 vowel sounds that she would do. So that's 5 long, deep, guttural breaths that she would do, which would be amazing for descending her baby down, progressing. So this whole time, I want you to keep in mind, she's experiencing a contraction where she's feeling safe, undisturbed, unobserved. She is feeling loved and connected. She is not stressed. So her hormones are on point because she is in this state of mind, which allows her beautiful contractions to just flow and flow and flow. It allows her to stay in her reptilian mind. It allows her body to move intuitively to create space. It allows her baby to remain calm. So as she is going through this contraction, she then does the A, E, I, O, U, and then by the time she finishes that, she knows, oh, I've probably only got 2 more breaths and then I'm done. And then she'd be done that contraction. Then she would settle and calm in the space in between contractions, be nothing but present. The next contraction would start. She'd find where she put her comb and do the whole process over again. She then did that over and over and over until her baby was born. So that is just an epic example of when we can manage our pain, when we have a good perception of our pain. Pain isn't scary. Pain isn't something to run away from or resist or avoid. Pain is something, in this circumstance, that is physiological. It is meant to be there. It is normal. It is natural. Every pain is bringing me closer to my baby. All of these kind of affirmations that are great, but Cody had that next level of just unshakable belief that this pain was normal, natural, meant to be there. Now, she did our birth workshop a couple of times. She did lots of yoga and Pilates, which in Pilates we really work on, experiencing that pain as progressive and normal. So we'll be doing squats and really kind of talking through that. Yes, this is how we can do hard things. Feeling that burn, but it's a progressive, normal, safe pain. You are safe. This is normal. This is natural. This is meant to be there. We don't need to run away. So she was doing all that throughout both of her pregnancies. So by the time it came to her second birth, she'd been doing all the mock contractions, etc., that she just had this epic, unshakable belief, honestly, unlike anything that I'd ever seen before. So it's a fantastic example, and I'm not saying you have to be at that level to still get this benefit of managing pain in labor for an easeful and progressive birth, but you can take a lot of the tools to be towards that end of belief and safety in that pain is normal, natural, meant to be there. So that is the 3 steps: partner support, labor and birth positions, and managing pain in labor to have an epic, easeful, and progressive birth experience. So I really hope you got a lot out of this podcast. I feel like you absolutely would have. So all of these skills and techniques we teach you and your partner in our Appetence Active Birth Workshop. And I just wanted to let you know, because we've just released our March April, May, and June workshop dates for this year, 2024. So if you're keen on getting into that Aberton's Birth Workshop, then jump on over to our website. The link is below in the show notes if you wanted to book in there. Any questions, you can also hit me up. Now, one last thing to close this podcast, I wanted to let you know is that we can often confuse easeful and progressive birth with a short labour. Now, lots of women want short labours, and that's fine. I appreciate why. Something I want to disclose is that short labours aren't necessarily always better. And many birth stories on our podcast will back the same thing. When we have a slightly more average length labour, but probably more like 8 hours plus, we have way more hormonal satisfaction during birth. So we have a slower increase to the more intense contractions. By the time we reach those intense contractions, we have epic hormones that are protecting us. We have epic beta endorphins with pain relief. We have oxytocin making us feel relaxed, loved, and connected. And we also have the beta endorphins that have got us in our reptilian brain. When we have a slightly not longer labour, but more average labour and a longer labour, we get more of that epic hormonal release. That also leads to more of a high after birth. Women always explain after birth, oh my gosh, it was just the most amazing euphoric experience, like when they've had this great experience for them. And that is the hormones. That is the hormones going crazy, giving them this epic chemical high, better than any kind of drug that they'd taken before. When we have a shorter labour experience, we don't get that same hormonal release. And it just is what it is. We do obviously get many hormones that amazingly support us. It's not the same experience. Shorter labours do tend to be harder and faster. So there's less time easing up to it. So therefore the intense contractions are a bit more intense. And we don't get that high as such after birth. So I just wanted to disclaim here, if you have a short labour, that's great, that's awesome, that's great for you. But try not to wish away what you have, I guess is what I'm saying. If you have a more average length labour, shorter isn't necessarily always better. So to close that podcast, thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed. Reach out to me if you have any questions at all. If you want to come to the workshop, I would absolutely love to see you. You and your birth partner will absolutely learn so deeply how to have an easeful and progressive birth experience in this workshop. Can't wait to talk to you guys soon.